Okay, so hopefully it's becoming clear how the law can function not only in socially creating race, but also in reinforcing race in a given country. So in a sense, laws could be manipulated to, if you will, protect the racial borders of America or other countries. That is to say, laws have the power to shape the racial populations of any particular country. So in the United States, for example, think about the following types of laws, many of which we've already discussed. For example, one type of law that functions this way are segregation laws, like Jim Crow being foremost among them. Jim Crow, of course, was legal segregation in the South. That was mandated by the end of the 19th century until the Civil Rights Movement, which led to its collapse by the 1950s, 1960s. And needless to say, this profoundly shaped the racial landscape of the South. Another type of law, well, we discussed this, anti-miscegenation laws. And obviously that functions to prevent reproduction between the races, and therefore, in a way, preventing mixed race families, and mixed race children. Still another type of law, immigration laws. Well, you could use that to keep out populations you deem undesirable. In fact, we discussed the 1924 Immigration Act, the Johnson-Reed Act, and hopefully you recall that completely barred Asians. So you're adding on to not only Japanese with the Gentleman's Agreement Act and the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, but now you're barring all Asians with the 1924 Immigration Act, as well as curbing the immigration from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. So all these groups were deemed less desirable or undesirable, according to the supporters of the Johnson-Reed Act. Okay, so obviously immigration laws loom large here in shaping the so-called racial borders of America. And still another type of law are citizenship and naturalization laws. And these have been used to bar citizenship privileges from those deemed to be undesirable for national belonging. So in the past, all of these types of laws function to preserve what was understood as the white population. And let me remind you what white meant back then, let's say in the 19th century, is quite different from what it means today. Today it refers to persons of European descent, even discuss like non-Hispanic whites and Hispanic whites, right? You consider Middle Eastern as white. Well, back then that was not the case. Okay, so the cumulative effect of such laws, well, they function to shape even the reproductive outcomes of the national population. They shape marriages, what types of ethnicities will be available. This is largely shaped by immigration laws, as we discuss. What the offspring will look like in the country, right? Obviously, anti-miscegenation laws and immigration laws that have excluded darker-skinned people, they serve to shape the procreative choices of people within the country, which affects the appearance of U.S. populations. Now, it's interesting to note that in some countries that are neighboring to us, like Mexico or, let's say, other Latin American countries, their histories when it came to race allowed for more miscegenation and racial mingling, and therefore you see this mixed race population. It's a mixture of like the indigenous people mixed with European descent. It's harder to define what is white in those countries. And then compare it with a country where laws are around, like immigration laws, anti-miscegenation laws, and naturalization laws, where you could discern more readily what is white and what is not. Okay, laws are functioning there to shape the racial borders of both the United States and those countries neighboring us to the south. Hopefully that's clear to you. Now, on this slide, we're going to be looking at two particular types of laws that, when it comes to Asian American history, these have profoundly shaped national belonging. Okay. Immigration laws and citizenship naturalization laws. And both have legal histories whereby race is indeed front and center. And we'll look at them separately, but also remember this, that they overlap and they work in tandem during historical periods in our history that, again, serve to exclude or lead to, let's use our term, leads to the differential inclusion of Asians in the country. Now, take notice of this slide here. We're going to be looking at these two types of laws I just mentioned. Number one, naturalization and citizenship laws, and number two, immigration laws. We're going to look, we're going to be breaking both types of laws into different historical periods. Okay, so when we discuss naturalization and citizenship laws, we'll break it up into two periods, one lasting from 1790 through 1865, and then the second period of naturalization laws and citizenship laws lasting from 1865 through 1952. Now, when it comes to immigration laws, we'll have three periods, and they're called by these names that historians have assigned to them. The first period is Old Immigration, as referred to by historians, and this encompasses 1790 through 1865. And then that'll be followed by the New Immigration period, which is from 1865 through 1918. And finally, we'll look at the more recent and contemporary immigration period. We're not going to talk about it in depth, but we'll just demarcate that area officially here as post-1965 immigration period. And all these dates here will make more sense once we start discussing them. Now, I just mentioned that both types of laws, naturalization laws, citizenship laws, and immigration laws, they work in tandem to perform this function of, to use my earlier term, protecting the racial borders of the United States during this period. Now, it may seem confusing to some students because, they overlap. So just try to keep track of, citizenship laws or naturalization laws and how that's interlaced with immigration laws as we discuss this further. So let's first discuss naturalization and citizenship laws during the first period. If you recall, the first period of naturalization and citizenship laws spanned 1790 through 1865. But first of all, let's ask this question because, we've been discussing citizenship and naturalization. Why is that so crucial in our discussion here? And to frame it in terms of the slide here, what is the essential meaning of citizenship in a democratic republic? Okay, that's the first part of this. And then the second part is, how has this been connected to race in the past? Well, hopefully it's clear to you that in a republic, well, first of all, let's define a republic. The republic is a form of political arrangement whereby the people rule themselves. And you have to contrast that with rule by a monarch, a king or queen, or rule by an emperor. In contrast, you have the people ruling themselves. It's a form of self-rule. Now, it's important to remember this, that during this time, during the 18th and 19th century, the United States was the only major republic in the world. Okay, the vast majority of countries or empires or what have you, they were ruled by a king, by a queen, by some emperor. The United States and a few other smaller areas of the world were republics. People voted for their representatives in government. And think about it, who is eligible to vote in the country? Citizens only. So in a republic, citizens rule themselves by voting for representatives. This is our what's known as Madisonian democracy, or Madisonian representative democracy. So therefore, in principle, citizens rule the country, not the king or queen. And therefore, citizenship is the central political lever, if you will, of a democratic republic. So now you can understand why it was deemed so important, citizenship, or who could be naturalized into citizenship back then, because with the republic being this political arrangement that was still the minority in terms of, types of political arrangements across the world. Well, it was considered almost an experiment back then. Now, arguably, this experiment really happened in 1789, more so than 1776. Why? You probably recall that this is the year that our Constitution was ratified. And indeed, many historians argue this is the actual birth, if you will, the actual birth of the nation. Now, speaking about birth of a nation, let's remember that nation is a social construction, as I previously mentioned. Now, though the United States was created on July 4th, 1776, due to the failure of our first constitution that followed that, historians argue that, well, it was really 1789 that was the actual birth date, in terms of the present day political system. So, with the nation just created, socially created, right, in 1789, think about it, there are no precedents to draw from. In a sense, the nation has to be socially created from scratch. So think of the United States as a quote-unquote blank slate upon which laws and precedents would be imprinted upon, and thus providing definition to that framework. And of course, this includes race-based definitions. For example, think about the leaders of this new country in 1790 and spilling over the 1800s. They had to decide questions like who could be eligible for naturalization and citizenship. Well, first of all, there's no mention of citizenship or naturalization or immigration in the Constitution itself in terms of, who could become naturalized. But there was a taken for granted assumption among these decision makers that were imprinting upon the blank slate, so to speak. There was this taken for granted belief that the United States was a quote-unquote white nation. And indeed, this was taken for granted because the United States considered itself as an extension of English civilization. So what did American political leaders decide? Well, this is seen in the slide here, the Naturalization Act of 1790. Two conditions were put forth by our framers of the early national period here in terms of who could become a citizen. Number one, you must be free, meaning you can't be a slave. And number two, you must be white. And white here is in quotes because, as you can imagine, what was white, quote unquote, back then in 1790 does not mean what it does today. So there we go. Immediately race appears when it comes to who could belong to the new country back then.